Hey there, my name's Sebastian, and this is Talk That Pod, podcast where I have conversations with some of the most interesting podcasters in the world. My guest today is a cartoonist, a storyteller, and one of the most thoughtful voices in the world of comic strip criticism. Jimmy Gownley is the creator of the beloved graphic novel series Amelia Rules, a work so warmly human that the Comics Buyer's Guide once called it a Peanuts for the 21st century. It's a comparison that clearly stuck, because Jimmy has spent the last 4 years doing a deep, obsessive, joyful dive into the 50-year run of Charles Schulz's Peanuts, one strip at a time, on his podcast Unpacking Peanuts. It's part cultural analysis, part creator deep dive, and part love letter to one of the most influential comic strips ever made. Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. I think we should just stop right there.
Sure, that's it. Let's end it right here.
I will just prove you wrong for the next hour. That's terrible.
I doubt it. So the podcast sets out to examine the complete run of Peanuts from 1950 all the way to the year 2000. And I feel like that's a really staggering ambition, 50 years of daily and Sunday strips.
Yeah.
So when you first conceived of the show, did you think you could pull that off, or did that scope sort of sneak up on you and you know, you had already committed to doing the podcast?
Yeah, no, I'm filled with hubris and unearned confidence. So it never occurred to me that we wouldn't do it. And recently we just recorded our 4-year anniversary. Mm-hmm. And my co-hosts Michael and Harold on the show said, yeah, we both thought we couldn't do it. I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, we never did anything like it before. What? And I realized, I guess it wasn't even so much that I knew we could do it, just that I was willing to fail. You know, I was willing to give it the old college try. And I never for a second thought they couldn't do it. You know, I was shocked by that. That's my goal was to read every Peanuts comic strip and discuss it with Michael and Harold. That was, if they didn't want to do it, then I didn't want to do it. So I'm glad I didn't know they had such reservations.
Fair enough. I'm wondering how analyzing Charles Schulz's work so closely, so meticulously, has changed your approach to your own blank pages and how you do storytelling. I'm wondering what kind of influence it's had.
It's actually super freeing. In some ways, I thought it would be daunting because, you know, it's like a LeBron James situation or something. I mean, he's just so far beyond what mere mortals can aspire to. I thought that in some ways it might, you know, stifle my own creativity. But then when you're looking at it really closely, it's like he's really just having fun a lot of the time. And he is going for the thing that just works in the moment. And one of the things that was so interesting, because Harold, one of my co-hosts, Harold Buchholz, comes from an animation background. When talking with him and really looking at the design of Snoopy, which everyone just takes for granted, but you start realizing, oh, the way he draws Snoopy lying on the doghouse has nothing to do with the way he draws Snoopy when Snoopy's dancing. They could be two different characters, but just because he invests it with so much personality, you believe it. And that's really freeing when you're like, I could just have fun. You know, I could just approach this blank white page and not with anxiety or a fear of not being professional or whatever it is, and just have fun. Because I think some of the best stuff he did, that's what he was doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's a really good realization to have as an artist is, you know, you look to the greats like that, but you also come away with a sense of, you know, they were really enjoying the process. They were really, you know, it was a work of love for them. And when you can bring that to your own work as well, you know, you can sort of bring something unique.
Yeah, I talk about willing to fail. I mean, Schulz would throw stuff out there. Like there's a character, Charlotte Braun, which is like a loudmouth female Charlie Brown. Put it out there, did not work, moved on, you know, but was willing to try it. The World War I flying gaze could have been a disaster, but he was always willing to risk it.
Now, as you've learned more about him and his process, is there something that kind of became more clear to you about how he approached it as you've been going sort of through it strip by strip?
I mean, I guess you always know it's personal because he said it was personal. But I guess the thing that struck me is that we would interview other cartoonists and other people on the show. And at some point, a lot of them said something like, well, when you're doing something every day, of course, you're going to find a way to put all of yourself into it. But then I started thinking, but then why aren't all comic strips as great as Peanuts? Because clearly people aren't doing that. And I think that's the thing that I really took away from it, is that somehow he combined a work life, which was like a dentist, right? He just like got up, went to an office, put his time in, but while he was putting his time in, he was somehow pouring his soul into the art. And I think inadvertently, or maybe, in some way planned, he found maybe the only way you could approach such a gigantic project and stay healthy, sane, and relatively, I think he got happier as the years went on.
Do you think that sort of sense of consistency and sort of day in, day out doing the work, do you think, I mean, for 50 years, do you think that's something that we should sort of, as an artist, is that something you want to emulate? Is that something you want to incorporate into your own work as well?
Yeah, 50 year, it's a little late to start a 50-year project at this point for me. But I started when I was 15 years old.
Right.
And the last interview I did, someone said, they were looking at the early Amelia stuff and they said, wow, your new stuff is so much like, they didn't say better, but they meant better. And I was like, well, yeah, if you draw 1,300 pages, you're going to get better.
Yeah, you're going to evolve.
I think that's, and I think that's just the thing. He was there every day, day in and day out, and he got better and better.
Yeah. What would you say is sort of one accepted idea or widely accepted idea about Peanuts that now that you know so much more about it is kind of wrong and kind of doing injustice to his work?
My other co-host, Michael Cohen, is the big champion of this viewpoint, but I definitely agree. There is, because of the merchandising and the licensing and to some degree the TV shows and stuff like that, there is a general cultural feeling that Peanuts is very, very sweet and very, very soft. And in some places that absolutely is, but it encompasses so much more of that. And in some places, it's punk rock. I mean, the first two Peanut strips are edgier than anything you'll see. The first one is the famous Charlie Brown, here comes Charlie Brown, oh, how I hate him. I mean, in 1950, that's the punchline, how I hate him. The second one, a little girl just walks down the street singing Sugar and Spice and everything nice, and then she punches a kid in the eye and says that's what little girls are made of. Yeah, I don't think people think of those things or the real cruelty that Charlie Brown goes through when they think of Peanuts,
Yeah.
I think it's Happiness is a Warm Puppy, which is great too. I mean, and that is part of it, but
sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, over the course of 50 years, you're going to probably have a lot of variety, right? In terms of tone and tenor and themes.
Especially when you're putting yourself in there, I feel like, whatever he was going through, I think in some ways, if it's not coming out in the page, maybe it's a reaction to it. It seems like sometimes when he was going through his darker periods in his life, the strip actually got sillier.
Yeah.
Which sort of makes sense if he is a person that's trying to find a balance in his life, and I think sometimes when he was more comfortable or whatever, he actually was able then to plumb some of the darker stuff.
Interesting. As I was going through your podcast, I heard in one episode you described that what you're doing in the podcast with your co-hosts is you're doing a sort of, a form of conjecture, reading into Schulz's intent and life based on the strips themselves. Uh-huh. What do you find is the line for you between sort of critical interpretation and just kind of projecting onto someone else's art?
Is there a difference? Like that is the tough part. I mean, and there are some parts of, his biographical story where let's say it's a juicier part of the story for whatever it is. There is a temptation to then start really, going full Sigmund Freud and trying to, and we really stayed away from that. I think partly just because on some level we're not confrontational people like that. We didn't want to, but the temptation sure is there, So every time we got too far that way, I think what we tried to always do is come back to looking at it as cartoonists, because that was the other thing I knew that we could provide that other Peanuts podcasts hadn't. Because there have been a few, there haven't been that many. It's a podcast, Charlie Brown is out there, and that's really good. But that looks at the Peanuts phenomenon as a whole, the animation, the strips, the licensing. And I knew what we could do is we could always pull it back to going, hey, what kind of pen is he using here? What kind of ink is he using here? And that really gives you a focus.
Yeah. I also noticed at one point you sort of transitioned the podcast just from straight chronological into more like thematic explorations. Like you've had this recent series called Understanding Snoopy and The Family Van Pelt. What sort of prompted that shift from kind of that linear timeline to more of a, I guess, character study?
Well, we got to the end. We shockingly read all 17,897 comic strips.
Yeah. And I saw your merchandise with that. That's cool. I like that.
Yeah, and then I was so proud I did that, put the t-shirt up, and immediately realized I had the number wrong.
Oh, no.
I got it right. We fixed it now. But yeah, you would think that having read and discussed almost 18,000 comic strips, we would think now we can shut up. But we decided we didn't want to shut up, so we started looking for more thematic ways to do it. And Snoopy just seemed like the best way to start, because Snoopy's having such a cultural moment. Gen Z just loves Snoopy. And what we realized was, well, how much of what they love comes from the strip and how much comes from everything outside the strip. And we thought, well, let's look at just Snoopy in the strip. And, because if you only know Snoopy from animation, you don't know that you could read his thoughts in the comic strip.
Right.
Which is a whole nother layer of character, Yeah. So that was really fun.
I'm interested in what you just said there about it really appealing to Gen Z. Why do you think that is?
I think, if you think about it this way, one of Snoopy's biggest and most famous personas is the novelist who sits at his house on a keyboard and imagines things, right? Snoopy also has a very fluid identity. He can be the World War I flying ace. He could be Joe Cool. He could be the writer, all this sort of stuff. And he is what Gen Z seems to call as wholesome. They love wholesome. But wholesome to them means something different than it meant, 50 years ago or whatever. And I think Snoopy is an icon that's sort of all of those things come together for them. And also because they haven't read all of the strip, they can project more of what they want on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, I think that's a good analysis for sure. I think the other thing too, from what I remember at least of Peanuts, is that it's often sort of described or thought of as quite simple. I'm curious, and I know it's not. I know it's very layered. So what would you say is maybe sort of some of the more philosophically complex ideas that you've come across while doing the podcast?
Well, one of the big themes, I think, of the whole strip is failure, and where failure and optimism sort of meet. It's very strange because lots of people would always say to Schulz, well, are you Charlie Brown? And he would kind of go, oh, I guess, he was the most successful person in his field ever by a country mile. He wasn't very Charlie Browny, but somehow he hung on to those early childhood and early young adult failures and expressed that through Charlie Brown in a way that's hasn't really been equaled. And the thing about it is, like, this has been on my mind for a couple of weeks now because they just released that Wuthering Heights movie.
Mm-hmm,
and some Gen Z kids went on and said, I tried to read the book and I don't get it. And then a bunch of people jumped on top of them like they should have had spontaneous Wuthering Heights knowledge somehow or whatever. But what's great about Peanuts is it's a classic that has the depths of something like Wuthering Heights, but it's as easy to read as a t-shirt.
Right.
That's really difficult. And if you put the time in and you read like Charlie Brown's arc, you'll see that he goes from being a wise guy who's kind of like almost a Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes figure to being this complete depressed loser to becoming almost like a father figure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, really fascinating. And the other thing that I think is interesting is that Peanuts is really postmodern in the sense I say in the strip or in the podcast that Schulz is a character in the strip because he will do things that contradict the laws of nature for or to punish or reward or whatever his characters. It would be something as simple as a beautiful day for baseball, then the next panel there's nothing but rain and it's just over Charlie Brown. Well, that's Charles Schulz,
Yeah.
And if you look at it as this postmodern kind of piece where he's interacting with the strip, it becomes super rich. It becomes the kind of thing you could, do 200 episodes of a podcast about.
Mm-hmm. So pulling on that thread a little bit more, again, having spent this much time with Peanuts and going through each panel, has that changed how you think about some of those core themes, as you mentioned, loneliness, failure, friendship, optimism? Has that had an impact on you?
Yes, to a degree that I think, I always sensed in my own work, particularly in Amelia, which is its 25th anniversary this year.
Wow, congratulations.
But thanks, crazy. But that there always had to be that balance of the melancholy and the humor. But I think the thing about it the thing that changed for me on this reread is I was deep. My appreciation of the lesser periods was deepened because even the lesser period, at no point did it ever fall below being an incredibly professional, top tier strip.
Mm.
But even in those places where it wasn't quite maybe at the peak of his ability, he was always looking for something new. He could have at any time just gone back and done Linus in the Blanket and the baseball game or whatever in the 80s into the 90s. But he searched and he searched and he searched till he finally found Rerun, or Linus's brother, who is basically a forgotten character from 20 years previously, and invented an entire new strip in the last 5 years about this crazy kid that wants to be an underground cartoonist. That's amazing. And, that to me is the kind of thing is like, wow, theoretically, I'm still 20 years away from that part of my career. I hope that when that happens, I'm up for the challenge of going, yeah, let's do something completely new here. Having been already so successful, it's wild. And that's
amazing.
Super inspiring.
Yeah, that's an amazing story for sure. I want to switch over to talking a little bit more about how you've promoted the podcast, how you've grown the show. So at your 100th episode milestone, which I guess was back in March of 2024, you said that you've been very lucky to watch the audience grow. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious what drove that growth. Walk me through that a little bit. And maybe were there any sort of single moments or exposure on a particular platform or a particular episode went viral that you can point to as kind of an inflection point?
I think it's basically just been slow, steady, upward growth with a couple exceptions. And I knew this would happen. The Charlie Brown Christmas episode. Because I know there's Peanuts, which is like a Star Wars level phenomenon. But then if you add a Charlie Brown Christmas with that, it's a Beatles level phenomenon. I mean, everybody loves it on some level or whatever. So I knew that once we did that one, that will get a lot of eyeballs on it. What I was surprised is that every year we re-release it and every year new people find it because of that. Yeah, so that was a big thing. And then last year, I guess towards the end of the year, Apple picked us as some sort of best listen of the year thing. And that shot the thing through the roof.
Terrific.
And the other thing would have been the interviews we've had. Every time we tried to reach out and get the best cartoonists we could get. And if we could ever get people that knew Schulz, then that was all better. And those people have, huge followings. Patrick McDonnell, who does the comic strip Mutts, just was on, and he was fantastic. And he brought a whole new audience. Lynn Johnson from For Better or For Worse. So we were really lucky with that stuff. And also Liz, our producer, is just great at everything. She can, she does good social media and all that sort of stuff. If you relied on me for that, we would not even be talking.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of successful podcasters use that sort of borrowing of, guest audiences to help grow their show. I think it can be quite effective. Obviously on paper, like a deep dive podcast about kind of a legacy comic strip, it sounds really niche, and yet somehow the show has charted quite well.
Yeah.
And what do you think makes the show sort of resonate beyond like hardcore Peanuts fans?
I think it's hardcore Peanuts fans. I just think there's that many of them.
Wow.
I mean, I guess not, because there are other Peanuts podcasts and we chart higher than those. So maybe it's not just that. Maybe people just like, here's the other thing. I'm a very competitive person. And Michael Cohen, my co-host, he famously said to me when we were like 20 something, when I was 20 something, he's like, I don't like humor. I hate humor. And I'm like, why do you hate humor? He goes, well, I hate humor because no joke you ever read will be as much fun as just hanging out with your friends.
That's right.
That's true, right? So I'm like, I just wanted though to somehow, I'm like, oh, well, what if we just made a show that it's just hanging out with your friends? And that's really what this is. And hopefully if there's anything that the tone conveys is that we're friends hanging out, talking about something we love, and we just want you to hang out with us,
Yeah. And I feel too like the podcast, it kind of belongs to this kind of shared rereading experience.
Yeah.
I've been seeing more podcasts like that pop up. Obviously you have a lot of the sort of rewatch podcasts of, either TV shows that are still ongoing or ended many years ago. But I feel like that sort of shared experience can foster a sense of community. Do you think that's true?
Oh, it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And I think it's something people miss because, we're such a fragmented, fractured, stay-at-home society.
That's right.
I think people love it. Going back to that Wuthering Heights thing, I'm like, well, what those kids actually missed is Sister Ann James' English class that I was in, where we were allowed to yell at each other and discuss the book and, really, even if you didn't like it, you got something out of it, And now you're on your own.
Right.
You're lost to a degree. So I think those things are great. Like one of my favorite, and this is obnoxious and pretentious, but one of my favorite books is Infinite Jest. The best way to read Infinite Jest is this podcast called Infinite Cast, where a woman just reads it to her husband and they discuss it, because then you're not alone trying to figure out what this thing is, and you can accomplish something that's more challenging that way.
I'd not heard of that one. I should check that one out.
Oh, I love it. It's really good.
So
especially they're reading on a balcony and there's like a thunderstorm in the back. Oh, it's fantastic.
That's awesome. Is it a video podcast as well?
No, just audio.
Just audio. Okay. So as you mentioned earlier, your producer, Liz, she does a bunch of the social media, and obviously you're active on, places like Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky, YouTube. And I feel like a lot of podcasters kind of, they dilute their presence a little bit by sort of trying to be in all the places all the time. I'm wondering if you've sort of found your audience on any of those platforms more so than others.
I'm not 100% even aware of that, but I don't think so, because we don't share so much. Yeah, and I know this is probably foolish and probably something that would help us, but we get a lot, you see a lot of clips from podcasts and they're shared on social media, and we don't really do that. But that's partly just because it's just the four of us, and there's only so many hours in a day. But the other thing that's a real challenge for us is that it's a visual arts podcast where we don't have any visuals. So we have to really rely on the chemistry of us just talking. But that's fun. That's a fun part of the challenge.
Yeah, for sure. And as far as monetization goes, obviously a lot of podcasters use a platform like Patreon. I know you use it as well. I'm wondering sort of what type of bonus content that you offer there to your listeners that has sort of proven to be the most effective at sort of converting people just from, regular listeners to paying supporters.
Well, I think the thing that has worked for us best is doing live events. where they can actually come in and interact with us. And, that's fun because that's something that it's fun and effective because it costs us nothing because we're just there. Right. But people kind of get a kick out of it because they can talk back to us for a change. So I think that's probably the thing that was the easiest and most effective for us to do. The other thing I'm doing now, though, which is kind of interesting, is like the other guy, well, Michael in particularly, has never seen an animated Peanuts special, will not see one. Like, he's a purist. And like, if the podcast made him watch one of those, I would feel terrible. Like, I would feel like I did him a terrible disservice. But what I'm doing for our Patreon subscribers is I'm watching the old specials and doing audio commentary.
Cool.
Which is actually just called hanging out and watching a cartoon with Jimmy. Because that is my goal, is just to make this a total hangout session. And that's been going pretty well too. And that's been a lot of fun.
Awesome.
But I think in terms of the thing that would actually, I'm not sure that would attract new listeners, but it's a good bonus for people that are there. But I think the live events are probably the thing people would enjoy the most.
Mm-hmm. You're now close to 200 episodes, I believe, and you sort of do it at a bit of a weekly cadence, I think.
We just recently, like last month or something, I guess we switched to two.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So what I'm curious there is, what's your sort of production pipeline like? What does that sort of look like week to week? And maybe what's sort of most difficult to kind of maintain over time? Is it the research you have to do? Is it sort of the energy that you have to bring in? Is it sort of the chemistry you have to manage between your co-hosts, or is it something else?
What is actually what I've realized, and one of the reasons that we cut it back to twice a month as opposed to weekly, was once we didn't have the structure of the reread, it actually became much more difficult. Like, we just yesterday recorded an episode about Snoopy and the Beagle Scouts, all the little birds, Well, those strips are scattered throughout almost 18,000 strips. So if we were going to find 10 to discuss, I have to go through.
Right.
That's a lot of work. That's I think going to be the most challenging thing for us going forward, just because we don't have that basic structure of because then it required nothing. It was just like, all right, everybody read the next 6 months or next year's worth of strips and pick 10. So I think that's the thing that's been harder. But the chemistry is fine. I mean, we're friends, and we would be talking about this even if we weren't.
Sure.
Maybe not quite as much, but
And, if I were to sort of wave a magic wand and kind of make you go back and, I guess knowing what you know now, having run this podcast for a few years, if you were to sort of restart Unpacking Peanuts today, what would you do differently?
Well, I'd buy a microphone instead of screaming into the back of my laptop. That would be very
good first
smart.
step. Yeah.
Yeah. I think if I was going to do anything differently, I think before we put out an episode, I would have recorded. I know we did record like 4 or 5 episodes, but I would have record the whole first season, and I would put out as many little snippets on social media as possible to get some buzz going. But as it was, we were just learning as we went. And actually, the first couple episodes, or the first one episode that's up, we didn't even have Liz. I recorded 4 episodes with the guys, and then I said I'll edit them, and I started listening to them and me screaming into my laptop and them not mumbling, and I just said, "Oh, they got deleted." Total lie. And then we started over with Liz, and it went much better.
Yeah.
But yeah, our workflow is we record it, and then we wash our hands of the whole thing, and poor Liz is tortured for the next week editing it.
Yeah. So I want to get into a little bit more about your feelings about the podcast industry in general, and talk a little bit about how podcasts are affecting our culture and our society.
Oh, God, help us.
Indeed. But in particular, when you look at Peanuts and sort of at its peak, it was running in over 2,600 newspapers and reaching like over 350 million readers, which is
a day.
I mean, that's a day. It's crazy numbers. I mean, that's like monoculture, right? And I think a podcast, no matter how successful, even if you look at the most popular podcast in the world, the Joe Rogan podcast, it reaches a fraction of that audience.
Right.
So I'm wondering, like, do you think, whether it's a podcast or a set of podcasts today, can ever sort of come close to developing that sort of same shared cultural conversation that, a great comic strip once could, or do you think those days are over?
I don't think any of us can predict the future, so you never know. I mean, if someone was so great and so talented, I can imagine anything happening. I mean, we never thought we would see anything as big as the Beatles or Michael Jackson. I mean, Taylor Swift, if she's not as big, she's right in the conversation, right? I mean, so anything is possible. I think the one thing that, like, the current, just broadcast, I used to work in TV news for years.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that was important about TV news is at 5:00, it was on.
Right.
And if you wanted to see it, you made an effort to see it and you sat there and you saw it together, and then people talked about it the next day or whatever. When things are released on erratic schedules or just all over the place, or you don't find out about it until there's 100 episodes already have passed, all that's a challenge. And I think the things that do mitigate that make it better is that really, if you have a laptop or if you even just have a phone, you could probably start a podcast tomorrow. And even if you don't make anything that would possibly, approach a monoculture, every little bit helps. If you put the best of yourself into the world, it's going to make a difference. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to do this, I was like going through a really bad time, hugely depressed. And I was like, well, what would be the one thing I could flood my brain with that would be positive? And I thought, well, peanuts, right? Started reading Peanuts, and then you realize, oh, it's not just me that needs this. It's all of these people that are listening to it, And that can happen like that. You just can't predict it,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand. I also think, too, podcasting allows a kind of depth that fosters, sort of more longer form conversations.
Yeah.
There's sort of a more willingness to sit with a topic, sometimes for multiple hours.
Yeah.
And we don't see that in the mainstream media anymore. It's rarer and rarer. And I feel like, tell me if you agree with this. Do you think podcasting has become sort of one of the last places for that kind of conversation and nuance to happen? Or are we kind of fooling ourselves into thinking that and all we're doing is kind of siloing ourselves into echo chambers endlessly?
Well, I mean, maybe, but I think, if the intent matters, and I think the intent is to foster long conversations about things that matter. And, it isn't being done other places. It's one of the reasons that I do kind of feel like, cutting up a podcast and into little bites and throwing it out on social media, while it will put eyes on your podcast or ears on your podcast, it does take away from the flow of it, which is
Sure.
the whole appeal of it,
Yeah.
And the other thing I love about it is that you can find an audience for something that is niche. Like, my favorite podcast in the world, other than Unpacking Peanuts, is this thing called Bananas for Bonanza, which is two guys. One of the guys is Conan O'Brien's sidekick on the Conan O'Brien podcast, Matt Gorley. The other guy's this comedian, Andy Daly. And it's a parody of a watch-along podcast where they put on cowboy accents and watch Bonanza, right? Well, where else at any other point in history would this have been a viable thing to do?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But here it is now, and I get an hour of what is essentially improv comedy every single week. It's fantastic,
Yeah, the format really enables a lot of creativity and even just the possibility of certain things being created that, you're right, where would you find that before, right?
Yeah, no one's going to put out any money to make a TV show, or it wouldn't even make sense as a TV show. What would it be? It has to be a podcast.
A radio show, I guess.
Yeah, a radio show or something like that. No one's going to syndicate anything like that. So
that's right.
It's perfect.
And I find that what I find interesting too about your podcast is that there's a dynamic where it kind of blurs the line between you obviously and your co-host being huge fans of the work, but you also serve as critics and you sort of, as you're going through the process, you become experts on the topic as well. Where do you find yourself on that spectrum? Do you find you're kind of leaning one way or another?
Well, I thought I was an expert until this last live event we did with our our Patreon supporters.
Oh.
And I'm like, I'll tell you what, Liz, you start any comic strip from Peanuts 50 years, and I'll know the punchline. I got 1 out of 10.
Oh, no.
It was humiliating. It's funny. I feel like if someone said, hey, would you be interviewed as an expert on Peanuts? At this point, yeah, I read it. I've read it 3 times now all the way through, and I did this podcast about it.
Yeah.
But that ends, like when I sit here at my art desk and start, I don't feel like I'm an expert. You know what I mean? Like I feel like I'm light years away from that. So, and plus just as anything, when you're up, you feel better about it. When you're down, you're like, I know nothing. Why would anyone listen to this?
Yeah, I hear you. Now, I also noticed Unpacking Peanuts does have a YouTube channel. So just going back to what we were talking about earlier about the various platforms. But I noticed you're not doing any on-camera content. Is that sort of a conscious choice? And I guess I'm curious how you feel about, there's been a big rise in video for podcasts recently. We're seeing, podcasts on YouTube. Now we're seeing podcasts on Netflix. Yeah, I'm curious how you feel about that.
Well, there is something a little irritating about all the celebrity podcasts, like,
Sure.
Head back to the Hollywood Hills. But yeah, I don't mind the video. The reason we didn't do it is we don't have the rights to the Peanut strips and didn't want, and I believe, of course, it would be a fair use.
Right. Yeah.
Slam dunk, because we're doing criticism and scholarship, but I also didn't want to get into a fight with Peanuts.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, of all things I want to do, I don't want to be sued by Snoopy. And so we just didn't do that. But I decided recently I want to turn, if not our YouTube, not the Unpacking Peanuts YouTube channel, maybe my Gville Comics web, which has nothing on the YouTube channel at all.
Mm-hmm.
I thought maybe what I'll do is just record myself drawing. This goes back to my hanging out idea.
Yeah.
Just drawing, and then run the podcast underneath it. So it will be constantly, maybe the visual will interact with but maybe not. And it'll constantly change. That's sort of a way I thought we could do it. But as far as just Unpacking Peanuts, without actually getting permission to do the strips, I don't think there's any way we could.
Yeah, I understand. That idea you just brought up, I bet it would be quite popular. Those kind of videos, I would not be surprised. Yeah, I do. I think.
All right, good. Well, yeah. All right. Well, you're the only person I've told about it yet. So good. One.
We're breaking news here. Yeah. No, I do believe that people. I mean, look, there's a whole culture of people, millions of people that watch streamers play video games, right? There's a whole culture around streaming, and I think part of that is just people want to live vicariously, but also when it comes to artists like you, people want to see how artists create their work. They want to see the process. They want to be a part of it. I think, I definitely think there's a lot of space for that kind of work, that kind of video.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for the vote of confidence. I'm going to give it a shot.
Yeah, you should. Okay. So final question. What are 3 podcasts you would recommend to anyone?
Okay, well, I would first recommend Bananas for Bonanza. It is so funny, and it's a Patreon only, but you can get a free feed on Apple. I would recommend, if you are a Peanuts fan, it's a podcast, Charlie Brown, by a guy named William Pepper. He is fantastic. And my third podcast, I'm going to do another comics one just because, why not? Screw it. We're just going to talk about comic, which is also 2 comedians, but it's not a comedy podcast. It's where they discuss, comic books, but they do it like by the artist. And their first season was all about the Stan Lee and Steve Ditko Spider-Man from the 60s, which anyone should listen to that. It's just a hoot to listen to and really fun.
Awesome. And where can people find you online?
You can find me at Gville Comics on Substack, and you can subscribe for free, and all of my work is there. And for Unpacking Peanuts, unpackingpeanuts.com.
Jimmy, it's been awesome speaking with you today. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Talk That Pod. Make sure to follow us on all the social places. Just search for Talk That Pod. And if you're not subscribed yet, this podcast is also available on YouTube at Talk That Pod Show. Also, if you liked what you heard, tell your friends about it. And if you really liked it, give us a follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And if you're a podcaster who wants to come on the show, go to talkthatpod.net and submit a request. Finding great podcasts is hard. That's why you should also check out Find That Pod. It's a podcast recommendation newsletter I write every week, bringing you 5 amazing new podcasts you should listen to. Subscribe today at findthatpod.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.